they're going to automatically do the analysis, root cause any trends they see, and that's all without any user triggers or user queries. So they're just going to run on their own. At basically, you don't have to have any user interaction. But if the user has any questions, like if it's like hiring an analyst, and then every month maybe you need a report, so you just go in and check in with the analyst. And so that's what makes us different as well. There are Q&A systems that are more generalist. We're more agentic based. That's more specialist.
Hey, Nikhil, welcome to the pod. Happy to have you here. And I'm sure the audience is excited to hear about what Nexus is all about. So, I'll hand it over to you and you can start off.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me on the pod. I know we linked over Twitter on one of my posts, but yeah, I'm Nikhil. I'm the founder of Nexus. What we're essentially building is a platform to allow teams, enterprises, and organizations to build their own AI database analyst agents. Essentially, build your own analyst team without having to spend money or time dealing with the data by yourself, or having analysts or hiring analysts to do so for you.
Awesome. So, Founder Journeys is about diving into your origin story as such, right? So, where were you before this? How did you get to starting Nexus? If you can, dive a little bit into that.
Yeah. So I think every origin story starts with like kind of the place you're brought up in. And I was brought up in San Jose, Silicon Valley. And so ever since growing up here, high school, everything, it's all startup, startup. And so that kind of gets drilled into your mind early on. And then I went to Cornell. I actually just recently graduated, so it's been about a year since I've graduated from Cornell. And over there, I studied electrical and computer engineering. But at Cornell, predominantly the focus even there was like entrepreneurship at Cornell, being part of clubs at Cornell. And so before Nexus started, I actually founded a company between kind of my last year and maybe until January of this year called SportTech, which was more on the sports side. But one big issue I faced there was that type of company required a lot of data analysis and a lot of motion analysis that came from the kind of product that I was building. And trying to analyze that data was a huge pain. And as good as ChatGPT is, ChatGPT also has token limits, a lot of limits. It's not meant for that, right? And so then Nexus eventually came about after, the old startup fizzled out. It kind of reached its ceiling and wasn't necessarily going where I wanted it to go. So I pivoted towards this. And it's been about 2 to 3 weeks actually since this recent pivot where it's now mostly a platform for organizations and teams, more in the B2B sector. So kind of Nexus came about this very natural, organic progression of something didn't really work, but I found a pain problem in that specific situation and kind of transitioned it to a company that I can use.
Interesting. So you've kind of used a problem that you faced and converted that into a product offering that more
Definitely.
people can kind of deal with. So how many of you, or was it just you yourself doing this?
Yeah, so my previous startup was three of us. And then both of them were more focused in the sports sector. I was more focused in the AI sector. And so when SportTech didn't unfortunately work out, I obviously shifted towards a, AI sector myself with Nexus. So right now it's me, but kind of trying to add more people that I know from my network onto my team, and we're going to build the founder team soon.
And so I understand the problem that you've discovered, but have you checked out in terms of how big of a problem it is in the industry, or are there other players who've solved for this? Where do you compare with other existing products, if there are any?
Yeah, definitely. I think when AI initially came onto the space, everybody was running towards how can we solve every business's data problems. And I think when you look at a lot of solutions right now, you take competitors like Camel AI or Julius AI, which are kind of the data-centric teams. Their predominant solutions are more Q&A system based. So you can connect your database and think if ChatGPT just knew a little bit about your database, you can ask questions, you can receive answers. Very Q&A. What we're building are agents. So these agents can obviously handle Q&A tasks. That's what they're meant for. You can also build agents to be just Q&A specialists. But what makes us really unique is the ability to build these type of agents called recurring agents. These recurring agents are agents basically that latch onto your database where your data is located. They're hyper specialized in a specific domain. For instance, if you have a bunch of customer data, they're going to be hyper specialized in churn analysis or consumer decision making. And they're going to automatically do the analysis, root cause any trends they see, and that's all without any user triggers or user queries. So they're just going to run on their own. At basically, you don't have to have any user interaction. But if the user has any questions, like if it's like hiring an analyst, and then every month maybe you need a report, so you just go in and check in with the analyst. And so that's what makes us different as well. There are Q&A systems that are more generalist. We're more agentic based. That's more specialist. And so in terms of finding that problem and who has this problem, it was definitely one thing that I did with SportTech was I wanted to build it and then I wanted to find the customer. This one, I made sure that I talked to the customer first because that's kind of the learning process I had with my first startup, and then kind of tailor the solution around that. So one of the big things I did was talk to a lot of people, talk to a lot of companies specifically. Initially, it was individuals because I was thinking more about a B2C, but finding these individuals who worked in these data-centric companies and understanding some of the data-centric problems they had, especially when it came to creating workflows and manual workflows, kind of saying, how can I automate that solution, especially for databases? That's kind of how Nexus has been kind of, I don't know, fleshed out or kind of molded in these last few weeks.
Nice. So it's I think this is a lesson for every founder who's building out there, that you need to first talk to your users and really discover a problem to build technology for. Everybody, it's very easy to get wowed by technology and build stuff and then go looking for a problem. So it's awesome that you've gone the right way about this. So when you talk about workflows, you said that you have agentic systems, or rather it's an agentic experience wherein
Yes.
your application automatically finds issues in the code, or issues in the data. And you said it is domain specific. So how easy is it for customers or end users to build on workflows, custom workflows on an existing data set?
So yeah, so there's, I think to clarify, the there's kind of two workflows you can have, right? There's the kind of self-initiated workflows that you go and initiate every single time. And then you have the automated workflows. A lot of companies, for instance, have kind of a automated system that calculates a bunch of numbers or specific numbers at the end of the month for to get the metrics that they need, analyze revenue, whatever it may be, or however they define that term. And then there's a lot of workflows where it's kind of shared company wide, where you give the access to the workflow, and then anybody who needs to run a specific type of metric or type of calculation can go in and run it on demand. And what we're essentially doing is, instead of you having to create the workflow, is essentially a step-by-step process. Uh, Using our agent builder, as we call it in the platform, you can essentially go in and say, hey, I want a non-recurring or an on-call agent, which would be like a user triggered agent that essentially is a domain specialist in this task. And then any workflows that can come under that specific domain essentially is now fully accessible through that agent. So what you're essentially able to do is you're giving the agent reasoning power, which is what makes an agent so powerful, as opposed to you having to define a step-by-step process for every specific metric. You're essentially lumping a bunch of metrics under a domain, and any metric under that domain and any workflow, quote unquote, that falls under that domain is now accessible through to you through a single agent.
If I have, see, workflows evolve with the
Yes.
business, right? You have you may have a library of standard workflows that fall under a certain domain or a certain function within a domain, right?
Mhm.
But then if that is evolving, how easy is it to add on to it?
So in terms of adding onto the workflow, or existing workflows or adapting it, I think what makes Nexus so special is, since you're not rigidly defining a predefined workflow in the very beginning, there's a high adaptability that comes with tuning your specific agent. So what you're essentially able to do is you're able to tune the task set of your specific agent over time. And so if your agent's focus has to be more broad or more narrow over time, you're able to do that through natural language. So you can ask it, hey, broaden your focus or narrow your focus. Um, so this is, I think, to make it more clear, it's not necessarily if you have an existing workflow that's like, I want to calculate this specific metric, it's not necessarily, Nexus is not going to help you essentially rebuild that workflow. What it's going to do is it can do that workflow and then any other workflows that would fall under a similar domain without you having to build it by yourself. You just have to build an agent that would be able to handle that entire calculation for you.
And what are the specific industries you currently are servicing?
Yeah, so right now where we're going into is the reason we're starting off with very small teams and startups and a lot of tech-based organizations is a lot of times these are the teams that have a lot of analytics teams sitting there, a lot of kind of contracted team analytics analysts, third-party analysts. So we're predominantly going under this space and specifically those that have a lot of consumer decision making to do. So predominantly ones that are business facing or need a lot of business insights. We're not targeting the analytics teams that are going to be tracking necessarily CPU usage or monitoring or stuff like that. Mostly ones that are business insights because that's where the reasoning engine is more powerful in terms of delivering the insights automatically based on the numbers it sees.
Got it. Okay. And specific domains, is it e-commerce or anything else?
Yeah. So in terms of the specifics, we're still obviously a little bit early in kind of getting that product market fit into a specific domain. Uh, Most of the early customer interviews that we had were predominantly in this kind of consumer facing businesses. And so like you said, e-commerce businesses or inventory businesses, it's kind of businesses that have endpoint customers that they're directly interfacing to instead of internal teams.
So when it comes to e-commerce, you have so many other tools that are there wherein you have, e-commerce businesses typically have custom workflows and then they are looking at custom dashboards, right? Based on the
Yes.
data that is being generated. So you have the CRM systems people play with already giving you dashboards. You have backend systems that are managing, let's say, warehousing that is already giving you a dashboard, right? And the struggle is always mapping between the data being generated at the front end and what's been happening, churning on the back end ops side, and then trying to make sense of it all as a business owner. So where do you see a wedge for you to fit in? Maybe because the biggest challenge again is when you already have invested certain amount of time in technology as you grow the business, adopting a new tool becomes very difficult, right?
Yep.
Meaning unless it really makes it unless it is super easy to do so, right? So do you see that as an area that you kind of can address? Or
Yeah, I think what you mentioned towards the end of that kind of wedge that we're trying to fit into is uh, that. So you have the dashboards that show you a bunch of numbers and kind of trends and et cetera. But kind of interpreting that is the kind of business owner's biggest nightmare often is what does that mean to me? What does this mean for me in the future? And so that wedge that we're fitting into is oftentimes the solution there is hire specialists, hire somebody who's able to kind of gain insights from that data off those custom workflows, for instance. Um, and so that kind of wedge where to kind of fit into is don't hire analysts or don't waste a bunch of your money on that. Use our tool to build you your own analysts. We're able to do that insight kind of from the data for you. And so that's why we're kind of behind this motto of build your own analyst team through our through our platform instead of having to go out and spend money or deal with the data yourself. So because a business owner is supposed to be the decision maker, he's not supposed to be the insight reader or the guy who comes up with the insights. And so that's the kind of wedge that we're fitting into. And in fact, you brought up a very interesting thing because we have a couple customer meetings coming up who signed up onto our wait list after launch that are very much in this domain of we're updating our CRM systems or updating our management systems, and we want to see how we can bring AI into the space. And that's how they reached out to us is like, we like this idea that we can kind of have our own analysts that deal with the insights. And anyway, we're going through this update, which a lot of companies are starting to go through anyway. And so we want to be able to make that transition early. And so we're trying to leverage that transition that's happening right now in a lot of companies, especially ones that are not necessarily as big that can build their own internal tooling to make that happen, and then get them on as customers early on.
Do you have any preferences of type of databases and brands that you work with?
Yeah, so obviously we launched last Wednesday, our demo launch, right? So we built for 1.5 weeks, I would say, barely 1.5 weeks. I built for 1.5 weeks to ship as fast as possible. Um, our preference is Postgres SQL databases. But I think one of the reasons I did that, like you mentioned, is I didn't want to go ahead and build and add a bunch of databases that people are not going to use until I talk to my customers or interested parties and see what do they want to use. And so I purposefully kind of held back on the type of integrations that I was building in to just put enough out there to draw in potential interested parties and then setting up these meetings with these interested parties to understand, okay, what the specific databases are you using? Because then I can go in and say, give me a week, I'll fit that in. And so that's the kind of strategy I've taken now. But right now, since Postgres is the most common database, easiest to demo, easiest to show, that's what we've supported so far.
Awesome. Yeah. So the what I was trying to hit at is exactly this: that how long does it take to onboard a new platform, right, or a new product? So yeah, every other startup today is either on using Superbase or using Cloudflare or
Yeah.
AWS. Whatever they get in credits is what's already priority that's available, right? Who is your typical buyer?
Yeah. So I think for us, it's the business's decision maker. So in a lot of these businesses that we're targeting, they're predominantly either SMBs, startups, or early stage teams. And so right now, most of the people we're talking to are either a person who runs his own SMB. So he's the primary decision maker, the owner of that small business. We're in talks with the founder of a startup. And so right now, the kind of direct communication is with the person at the top, because I think getting enterprises at this point is really hard. But you also get muddled in a lot of bureaucracy and stuff like that. Because having done SportTech before, I remember when one of our first targets was athletic teams, and athletic teams are super corporate in the way of how they're structured. So oftentimes, by the time you get to the person who makes a decision, it's already like 6, 7 months, and it's way too late. And so had we started with smaller teams, it would have been a lot easier to make that decision and make it happen. More specifically, it's also really nice to talk to a lot of these like high level decision makers in these small companies or small businesses, because not only are they decision makers, but they're fully aware of their staff. Like they don't have to pass you somebody else on their team to make you understand what's going on. They're well aware vertically on this is all the systems that we have in place. This is all the databases that we're using, and this is all the insights that we need. And so you're kind of hitting two birds with one stone during a 30-minute meeting where you're able to get the deal closed potentially, but also learn the entire specification that's necessary.
Yes. Yeah. The other thing that comes to mind is anything to do with data and privacy follows very closely, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Enterprises, yeah. So enterprises obviously have many more hoops that you need to jump through to
Yes.
get to that level. But when it
Yeah.
comes to, but nevertheless, I'm just wondering, how do you address security as part of your service offering or a product offering?
Yeah, I think going through the basic spiel of all the data they provide is stored in secure databases on our side. Beyond that, I think, like you mentioned, what I want to build is essentially a trust pattern where you provide some data, see the insights that you get, and make sure that Nexus works for you. Then we kind of build up that level of trust towards the most interesting and most useful data you want to put through. And so more and more, you kind of slowly integrate Nexus into your entire database, but not all in one go. Because to be frank, with Nexus and with a lot of these companies that deal with databases, a big part is organizations and companies have to kind of hand over, um, at least connect Nexus to their database in some way, be that through database credentials, be that through user authorization, be that through adding a role for Nexus or any of these similar companies onto the database. And so a pattern that's often followed, and I'm in many ways, this is a copycat league, is uh, in pattern that's often followed by these more successful companies that have come into the Q&A system, like Camel AI and Julius, is kind of this pattern of trust they build over time with the type of data that's exposed. And so you start gradually from low, low, I guess, importance data but you still need insights from it, and you want to kind of get used to the platform and org flow, and then you kind of build your way up to the uh, highly secure data. At which point, not only has Nexuses over time been fully integrated into the system, but we've also become more secure just given kind of the passage of time and more robust over time.
Okay. Apart from typical B2C businesses that you're currently looking at, how does this work with startups that are focused on deep domain, let's say something in heavy engineering or manufacturing focused stuff? The data there may not, so because when it comes to customer information, that's where it gets very critical in terms of the security side of it. The other end of the spectrum is IP related information, and then you're kind of building any kind of internal applications where you're kind of creating it, and have kind of stuff for employees to build efficiency into processes. That becomes a tricky thing. But over and above those two extremes, do you see an easier way for you to get in and service the rest of the data types
Yeah,
across
yeah.
different industries?
Yes. So, like you mentioned, the one of the meetings that we have set up with one of the small SMBs, uh, is his primary need is he wants a better way for inventory insights. And so that is a lot less of a security risk or security concern situation, that we're in talks with. And so again, the only reason I give the consumer example is because the launch video included a consumer example. So a lot of people resonated with that aspect when they reached out. But this person reached out because he was more concerned about, I have inventory, I have kind of management systems, I have a lot of moving parts that I kind of want to compress into one, where I want these because he has a lot of stuff. He uses a lot of systems that gives him a lot of stuff that he doesn't even need because he's realistically only focused on one thing, and that's his inventory and inventory insights and what comes from there, what's missing, what's potentially needed, what is high demand of what he needs to fill up on his inventory. Stuff like that is a lot of stuff that he has to either manage or he looks at a bunch of numbers and then he has to make decisions off of, even though there's another 100 numbers that his systems provide that are useless to him. And so inventory is one thing that's super interesting. I hoping that conversation, gives me a little bit more insight that's coming up soon. But I think that's an aspect, like you mentioned, where we're trying to take the path that's has less obstacles, and I think that inventory path is a very interesting path that we're going to look at. And you mentioned like a tech situation of tech companies have a lot of data outside of customer data, but just internal data or internal analytics that might be super useful for them. That's actually one of our focuses because I used to work at Amazon, and there was a specific analytics team that was very much focused on. I worked at Amazon Robotics, so a lot of the analytics had to do with kind of the robot movement, how, the robot efficiency. They were doing factory floor robotics, so efficiency of moving stuff around. And there was an analytics team very, very much focused on that. But there's a lot of startups that are in the very similar space, not necessarily in the robotic space, but in the general space of how efficient is our platform? What's our conversion rate of our platform? What's the marketing conversion? We were in talks with the startup early on too. So that space is also really interesting in terms of the marketing conversion efficiency of our platform that we're also exploring. Again, we're just building up that waitlist space. So we are hoping to get more of these customers on board.
Okay. So yeah, inventory is a big thing. I've worked very closely with companies that have kind of spent so much of time digging into patterns associated with inventory and workflows, and then trying to figure out where to fix something, because there's so much of operational costs that can be optimized
Yes.
if you really look at the right set of data at the right time, right? So that brings me to the next thing I was thinking about. Um, if I have, again, I'm going back to custom workflows here. Uh,
Sure, sure.
so if I have built a business over time and I'm seeing patterns that are seasonal, and I know, let's say I'm selling 5 different types of products across 4 different types of regions, and each of them are seasonal products, and then I'm seeing patterns, but then there is something that's changing in the market. So I'm kind of looking at trends that are coming in based on user activity, right?
Okay.
Engagement, let's
Yep.
say. And then I'm kind of mapping it out to historic sales information that's already available on orders and whatever. And I want to write a new rule to kind of give me a snapshot using this two different or maybe three different data sets across silos. That is kind of going to populate something for me.
Mhm.
I'm kind of just, this is just like an open-ended question.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, definitely, definitely.
So is this something that is in currently available or in the roadmap, or is that something that you see as a potential, offering?
So, correct me if I'm wrong in what I understand. So you're kind of saying you have kind of historical data stored across, or historical data and current trends that you've stored across three different data sets, and you want to build a specific rule that kind of finds the insights from all three, or
Yeah,
the
it's
relationship
it's
between
it's
all
like
three?
I'm looking at the patterns in the market. I get some information based on, let's say, somebody who's on ground dealing with maybe somebody who's in a store, right? And I'm saying, okay, I need to figure out what this can look like based on
Hmm.
my earlier, because I'm not going to sit and track. I will not have information at the back of my head in terms of the last 2 years patterns or something like that, right? But I think there is something here in terms of a tactical thing I need to do from a business perspective.
Yeah.
So I need some insight from the
Ah,
data,
got you. Yeah.
and there I'm going to add a few of my, thinking about it in a natural language terms. I'm just going to say, contextualize, last quarter 2024 with the first quarter 2025 for this product, and whatever, contextualize the latest trends in that's coming from the ground, right, or
Hmm.
on site, and then give me insights, something like that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that's actually a very interesting situation because that's what I think makes Nexus different from the other platforms. If you look at the other platforms, I think the ChatGPT instance is a very good analogy here is you open up a chat, the history starts from the start of the chat to the end of the chat. After that, history is gone when you open up. There's some kind of, you know, it remembers some things, kind of a very, very, very high level, but it just remembers like, okay, you like to write this way, or you're asking specifically about this product or whatever, maybe this topic. It builds a personality about you, but it's not necessarily super focused on the history of everything that's coming through. And a lot of solutions are like that. That's why I call them generalist solutions. They're good for instances where you have a certain data set, you just need to ask one question and you're done. Or you have two questions that are not super related, you're done. What makes Nexus different is the moment you latch it onto a database, it's basically how I like to say it's there. It's going to live and grow with your database from day one to day end. The day you take it off your database is when it stops remembering everything. But until that point, it is tuned, and essentially when you build the agents, automatically kind of set up to realize and use the fact that it's a specialist from the day of its inception to the day it's kind of taken off the database. So when you ask about this historical data set, is every insight that it gives, it's always going to kind of benchmark it based on the previous context that it remembers. So especially if you're using these recurring agents on Nexus, let's say it runs in January of 2024, and the next time it runs is March, and then next time it runs is December, and then again in January 2025. Every time it runs, it's always going to look back at what happened in the previous turns. Because that's how decision making in business is made, right? You look at what the previous trends and what's happening right now. It's always going to benchmark the existing trends based on the previous trends. And so, like you mentioned, in this situation, if Nexus is run back in Q3 of the last year, and then you rerun it of Q1 of this year, it's always going to know, okay, this is what happened in Q3. This is something I should keep in mind. How does it compare to Q1? Because it's automatically tuned to make sure that it looks at its history and understands its trends before kind of going in and doing any analysis necessary now or making any insight reads that it needs to do.
Okay. So coming back to domains, so you mentioned e-commerce, we've spoken about marketing or engineering. What happens to research driven domains? Something like, there are a lot of work happening in pharmaceuticals, right? Clinical trial data and stuff like that, where that's a ton of data that needs to be kind of looked at in a very different light. So do you see clear value there as well? I understand you're looking at it from a technology perspective when you come with the product, but I'm
Yes.
just trying to contextualize it with domain here, just to see
Yeah.
what the capabilities are.
Yeah. So I want to drill down on a very specific line of research this could be useful for, and then why it's potentially not useful for other lines. So I've done research when I was in college, and a lot of it was kind of based around data, as most research is. The predominant amount of data in those research fields, at least from academic research that I've taken part in, is predominantly not stored in databases, is what I understand. And a lot of data that I've dealt with is not stored in databases. It's very kind of temporary, transactional, a lot of CSVs, a lot of Excels. Um, you'd think research would be a lot more sophisticated, but it naturally isn't, unfortunately. A lot of research is not so dependent on persistent data that academic research, at least from what I understand, does not necessarily play a big value for Nexus. The other side of the coin is, like you mentioned, pharmaceutical or health data. Um, this may be just kind of personal hesitation on this as a founder, but with SportTech, I try to pull SportTech into the physical therapy space. And it is the biggest headache, I would say, to deal with any form of health data because people are super sensitive about it. Companies are super sensitive about it. And there's a million hoops that you have to jump through to even be able to get exposed to that data, even if you're the one controlling that data. There's SOC 2 compliance, there's HIPAA, there's a lot of kind of obstacles that you have to go through. So by and large, I try to stay out of that space. It's not a space I'm super knowledgeable in, but it's not a space that I've had the greatest experience in either. Where I think Nexus, in terms of the research field, can be valuable is what I'm not super technical about this, but kind of this long running research. A lot of long running research that's not super like publish a paper and then that's it, is kind of research that they store data over time for months and months and months. A lot of research that worked on was not like that. It was kind of you start a project and then you end a project, very corporate. But there's a lot of research that I've been exposed to, which is they start some form of data collection at the start of the year, and then they're constantly seeing if any trends have changed, manually running these workflows that they have built, uh, say every month or every 2 months to see if anything has changed and what they can learn from that. And sometimes that means they see the trend they want to see by the end of the year, but other times it could also mean they see the trend they want to see next year. That type of long running research is going to be stored likely in databases as opposed to these transactional methods of moving information or data like a CSV or Excel. So in those spaces, again, not super uh, well versed in this, but I know in that kind of category of research, there's a potential application for this.
Okay. Coming to the CSV part, a lot of people who want to migrate from legacy workflows or other migrate from legacy setup to products, let's say, to kind of
Okay.
streamline the entire setup, they would have a lot of CSV based data and stuff like that. Even medium to large enterprises, we've dealt with so
Yes.
much of information that is stored in CSVs, so much of workflow related information stored in CSVs that you have to ingest and then actually clean up, right? So, are you saying that is not something that you really deal with, or you know?
Yeah. Interesting fact. So, Nexus prior to databases dealt with CSVs and Excels. So I'm glad you brought it up because there's a reason I shifted away from that. And it was predominantly because of Excel. What I noticed with Excel is a lot of corporate files, at least, have very interesting formatting to say the least. It's not super tabular, not super structured. And AI at this point, and a lot of reading at this point is not at all good at that. It is very good at very tabular and structured data, which databases are, but really bad at this kind of overly unique formatting, especially if different colors mean different things, and you gotta do a lot of prompt engineering to even get remotely started. And so we kind of shifted Nexus away from CSVs and Excels to databases, predominantly because I also wanted to go more into the B2B space as opposed to the B2C space. But on the CSV note, the CSV note is something I've been thinking of. Like you mentioned, if a lot of companies have structured data, it might be a good service or a good kind of opportunity for them to use Nexus to build the database and then attach Nexus to that database or attach the Nexus agent to that database. Um, it's not a service that's offered right now. I'm trying to work with existing databases, but it is something that I've been thinking about, essentially a possibility to get more customers by helping them move from how they store data into databases and then using Nexus to kind of attach to those newly made databases.
Yeah, I mentioned e-commerce earlier, right? One of my early clients way back in 2012, 2010, 2012. They were the reason why we could work with them well, and we kind of got them to do a long-term application build with us. Was they were running their entire operations off Excel sheets and CSV files, and then we showed them a path to cleanly ingest that into the application we were building, and then streamline operations over time. So I think it's a very interesting, strategy if you can target, customers who are dealing with Excel. Because believe it or not, there are many enterprises, many businesses that run off Excel sheets even today,
Yeah, yeah. No,
right? So
I definitely know that. Yeah. That's the reason Nexus actually started off with Excels and CSVs. But there's actually a version for Mac users to use the older version of Nexus that works really well off of CSVs, and it uses a very similar kind of principle that we use with the current version of Nexus. But again, like you mentioned, it's definitely something that I'm going to revisit, especially because I've already done it once with one version of Nexus. So it's definitely something that we're probably going to come back to and help teams kind of migrate, because like there's a lot of businesses uh, like that run off of the old way of doing it, simply because sometimes it maybe seems too technical to do the migration by themselves, and they're just comfortable in one way, but they really do want to upgrade and update and move to another way, but they just don't have the resources to do so or the expertise to do so.
yeah, you mentioned being too technical. So dealing with databases and analytics has always been seen as a hardcore technically able or technically focused role. So
Yeah.
with Nexus in context, are you thinking of changing that whole thing up, meaning anybody who's got domain expertise can work with Nexus?
Yes. So the whole point of Nexus is it it is meant to help both technical and non-technical teams. So for technical teams, they can tune their agent to be more technical. They have that capability where when they build the agent through the agent builder, they can just tell the agent, hey, also be super technical about the insights that you provide, predictive analytics, etc. For non-technical teams, since it's all natural language queries, you can say by inception or by, I guess, default, the Nexus agents are not meant to be super technical. They're meant to be more kind of insights driven and kind of more natural language driven. So they're not necessarily supposed to be meant to be providing super detailed numbers or super predictive analytics. But if you need to tune it that way, you can. For non-technical teams, if they really, really want to dumb it down and make it a lot more easy to understand and digestible, again, since it's all natural language queries, you can tune from 0 to 1 anywhere in between. And that's what makes the agent builder so cool, I think, for a lot of non-technical teams.
You mentioned predictive analytics.
Yes.
So how does that scale over time in your mind?
Yeah. So the predictive analytics is a new aspect that I've been looking at for Nexus. So up until this point, Nexus was predominantly work off the data that you have and then come up with the insights or whatever the user specifies. The predictive analytics is a little bit less structured in that way, where since the Nexus agent has kind of the entire, I wouldn't say power, but the entire decision making capability of seeing what metrics can potentially be used for a certain type of prediction or shouldn't be used for a certain type of prediction. And so I think that aspect is something that is going to be looked at a little bit closer in terms of what we're building. It is something that a couple teams were interested in, because it would be kind of a nice add-on where you can just ask these very easy questions and it could tell you like this is potentially what's going to happen. But in there comes kind of confidence probabilities. How confident is it? How much can you trust it? So it is definitely a very quote unquote beta feature that, if anything, that we're working on, but it is something that a lot of teams are interested in. It is, however, something that we always have to warn teams about. it's not 100% accurate. It is just a prediction. Could be wrong, could be right, but we'll try and make it as grounded and as much based on your data as possible.
So coming to inaccuracies on the system, so is there a method for users of the application to give feedback so that there's some kind of a regenerative feedback kind of a thing, or reinforcement feedback, sorry, kind of a thing
Yes,
that's included?
yes. So once every user builds an agent, they always have the ability to update the agent specifications. And part of that is also being able to provide feedback to the agent. And so if the agent, say, provides a value or something that they do not think is correct, they can always they don't have to rebuild the agent. They can just tell the agent, hey, when you're doing some churn analysis, you're kind of using potentially wrong metrics, or you're potentially using the wrong tables or columns. And it automatically understands, okay, next time that I have to do it, I shouldn't potentially use those columns and I need to adapt. And that's the beauty of, I guess, the AI boom, is being able to create these very highly configurable systems based on the user interaction. So there's definitely a way for users to kind of provide feedback to the agent directly without having to necessarily interface with us and then us having to update a workflow or an agent.
Now, that's pretty cool because, yeah, as a user, I would just want to say, no, this is not right. It should be in the range of, because as a domain expert, I may get a recommendation from the system that says it's your prediction is at this percentage, let's say. And I'll say it cannot, this industry make sure that the defined percentage variation for that is not that, but it is this, something like that.
Right.
Right.
And then it'll automatically kind of update its thinking that the next time I have to calculate that metric, the user told me that this is actually right. So I should probably rely on that based on what I've done like 50 times before.
Right. So it's kind of taking that as the rule to follow.
Right. The agent always, when it's configured early on, it is always going to be providing user feedback, higher kind of importance over its own feedback. Because part of reasoning, it kind of understands how it needs to change and adapt. But if the user comes in and tells it, actually, this is the right way, it's always going to kind of depend on the user. Because at the end of the day, it's for the user to use, not for the agent to kind of run on its own.
All right, cool. So, how about a demo of the product?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me pull it up. Can you see it?
Yes, I can see the screen.
Okay. Awesome. So, uh, for this demo, I'm just going to kind of walk through some of the steps of using the current version of the platform. We've kind of added some additional features to the platform, which includes being able to connect to CRMs like HubSpot and be able to create a wider range of analyst agents. But this provides the overall view of the process itself. So, it's pretty simple. So the user just kind of starts off by being able to, uh, let me go back here. So
So,
yeah,
while you're doing this, Nikhil, who is the user? If you can just define
yes,
who the user is or the role that is going to use it, it'll be great.
yes. So this is going to be anybody within the startup space that we're tackling. This would be likely the founder who would be setting this up because they're going to be the point of operations for this. For a larger size startup, it's probably going to be either the COO or someone who is in charge of the business insights at that particular company. For some of the smaller businesses that we're going towards, this would be somebody who's currently operating and getting insights, say, from their database. They have existing workflows and scripts ready to interact with their database slash CRM. And instead of having to directly tackle with those platforms, they would kind of come here and use this as a central point, aka Nexus, for tackling with their different data sources that they have business data stored in.
Okay.
So it's a pretty simple process. So you come and sign up with your login and email. Oh, sorry, login and password. So it's a basic sign-in process. And the login username and password, you can kind of set it during the registration. And it's available for individual enterprise and small teams. For enterprise and small teams, the login and passwords can be shared across the entire kind of team. So it's just the same login endpoint for anybody on your team. So anybody on your team can kind of access the exact same analyst that you create. When you get into Nexus, there's kind of three components here. there is the database connection panel, the agent panel, and then the agent builder panel. What you're seeing here right now is the database connection panel. So here is where you kind of, as the person who's setting up the agent, provides the type of database and the database credentials that you want Nexus to latch onto. So in most databases, there's very basic credentials that the database provides as a way for a lot of analytics teams right now where they have to kind of pull that credentials and create their own backend processes to be able to connect to that database. So if a startup has an analytics team, the person in charge of that kind of gets that credential and sets that all up. Instead of that, you can just pull the credentials right out of whatever platform you're using, enter it here. Then the platform automatically verifies that it can connect to the database, and then it activates the connection here, where you can see that I have a customer data database already kind of tied to for my agents to use. And this is a sample database that I'm using. And right now it's Postgres databases, but we're adding support for additional type of databases, such as Snowflake, etc. So it's just as simple as providing credentials, and these credentials are obviously securely stored in our own database, and it's only used by Nexus and not kind of shared or anything like that.
Okay.
So once you create that, then I told you about the agents panel. So the agents panel is kind of where you have all the agents that you've created, the specialized agents that you've created. So these are some of the agents that I already have that I've created. And you can see they're mostly in kind of the customer churn, mostly in the business aspects, because the type of database that I'm using here is customer data. So these are kind of the specialist agents I can create using that data in that database. And so here, if you want to ever access, be it your recurring agents, as you can see, it kind of shows you which ones are recurring and which ones are not. So I got one recurring agent, 3 of them are non-recurring. So if you ever want to access your agents once you've created them, but you kind of come here, you can access any of your agents and you can have as many as you need and as many specialists as you need. You also have the ability to delist your agents. It won't be working with your database anymore, kind of delist on its own.
So what do you mean by recurring agents here?
Yes. So recurring agents are those autonomous agents that kind of automatically manage your database or whatever data it's attached to. When you go through the agent builder process, once you've selected what database or what data source you want your agent to latch onto, here, when you create your agent, you can either make it recurring or non-recurring. The easiest to start off is non-recurring, aka just is like an agent that's there where if you ask it questions, it gives you answers or it conducts analysis. So it's more ad hoc, I guess, in that it's like just having a team member that you can ask questions and get answers from. The recurring agent is kind of more like a real analyst where it's inherently something that just runs autonomously and kind of manages your data source autonomously and any insights it needs. So when you create your agent, you can just kind of say, hey, I need an agent that's kind of focused on my monthly revenue. So it's an agent then that's going to basically see if any trends have changed, anything has changed per month. So it automatically manages it. And it's not something you have to trigger by yourself. You kind of tell it when it needs to trigger, and then it'll do that on its own. So it's more autonomous in that sense, and it makes sense for certain situations, while the on-call or the non-recurring agent makes sense for other situations.
Okay.
Yeah. So for the generate agent flow, you just first attach the agent to the specific data source you want. Here, I'm attaching it to my database. And when you're generating the agent, all you really have to specify is the type of agent that you're looking for. You can be very specific and say it's recurring or non-recurring, but the agent builder normally already picks up on that based on the task that you provided. So it'll automatically assign it to be a recurring or non-recurring agent and build it accordingly.
Okay.
And all you have to kind of mention is, okay, hey, what are you looking for from your agent? So when I'm creating this agent, I'm kind of focused on an agent that knows about my consumers' decision making and potential churn and transactions and what type of transactions are leading to that churn. What's that trend that I'm seeing with my customers?
Right.
And so I make it very explicit here as part of the example to not have it be recurring. But you can also make this recurring of something that you're looking at monthly, weekly, something like that. And so
Okay.
so it's very simple, just a couple lines. You don't have to give extreme detail, no workflows that you have to create your own, no drag and drop, nothing like that. Just a couple words and sentences on what you need. And then the rest of it, the agent builder handles. So the rest of the tasks that the agent builder essentially is handling here, essentially what it's doing, it's creating an agent. For more specifically a reasoning engine, because it can kind of reason about the data it sees, and essentially does a couple things. One, make sure that the database that you're sourcing or data source that you're sourcing, it's something that it can latch onto. If there's missing permissions that you need to fix, if the credentials are wrong. So it kind of takes care of all that. And it registers the agent based on the configuration that it pulls based on the description of the agent you want. So it automatically registers that configuration, uh, gives and equips the agent with all the tooling and the understanding of the data source the agent needs to perform really well, and then sets
Okay.
up the agent specialization. Um, and so it
Okay.
does all that for you. So it's not something you just kind of let it do it and then it'll build the agent for you. So it's not something that you have to in explicit detail mention it when you have to build the agent. You just have to give it the task and it'll handle everything else for you. So once that agent is created, you can load the constructed agent. This is just a really good way. That's why it's a scratch pad, where you can kind of make sure that the agent details that you want are there. And so there's an agent property if it's recurring. Are there any warnings when it was created? Like, it couldn't register the semantic understanding or the understanding of the data source, or the connections were not valid.
Where does it notify you that it didn't find the right?
Yes.
Maybe
So
if there's an issue in the database
yes.
configuration or
So
something.
in a situation where there is any issues, you will see a warnings here, and then it will be like a exclamation point. When you click
Okay.
on it, it'll kind of be a drop down that shows you the different warnings. Right now, there's no warnings. So
Okay.
yeah, it'll like alarm you, and on top of that, you won't be able to launch the agent if those warnings are kind of some of the critical warnings, such as it can't even like validate your database.
Okay.
The good thing about the agent builder is that you don't have to restart the process. You just have to tell it to try it again. So it kind of remembers the steps it went through. And so it's not something that you have to start a new agent build just to do the exact same thing again. You can play with the existing agent build and continue to tune it until you get what you want. And
Got it.
so if you need to update any properties, you can go right back to the chat that we were just seeing.
A lot of products that we've seen, typically errors will be like system errors related stuff, right? You'll have error codes and things like that come up, and then the person has to kind of decipher what that means,
Hmm.
and has to go down has to have a certain amount of understanding to be able to fix things.
Sure.
If you're expecting a manual intervention. So in your case, I'm wondering, is it more natural language wherein the error is also stated in the sense that this is the problem, you need to fix this?
Yeah, so I think the theme of Nexus is everything is natural language.
Okay.
And so including the warnings. So it's not going to be like error code 202 or 404 or,
Yeah,
anything like
that's
that.
exactly what I was saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because that means like this is meant for teams to build fast, and especially for non-technical teams to build fast, right? So it's not
Okay.
something we want teams to waste their time on. So it just tells you like, okay, it was unable to connect to the database or validate the connection, uh, cross-check the credentials in the database panel, or something along those lines, or it couldn't, understand the database relationships because certain permissions were missing.
Hmm.
These are the permissions necessary, etc.
Okay.
So yeah, the errors are going to not be in error codes or anything that the team has to look up to fix. It's just going to be all natural language, and it tells you what you need to fix. So
Oh, that makes it super easy. Yeah.
yeah. So once you've loaded the constructed agent, cross-check everything is good. Everything here to me seems good. If your agent is recurring, what it'll also show is like its recurring status when you create the agent. So just to kind of give you a brief rundown of that, it's along with the agent properties, it'll kind of tell you like, okay, this agent is going to be some agent that's going to run monthly, and it's going to look for exactly these specifications, and it's going to log these metrics and then create this report, etc. So if your agent is recurring, it'll tell you kind of the schedule it's going to run on. But in this case, it's not recurring, but that's just an add-on. It'll tell you if the agent is recurring.
Okay.
Uh, and so once you do that, you can launch the agent and it's started. To access the agent, you can access it in two ways. You can either just search up the agent from the search bar itself and it'll pull it up for you once you created it, or which is an easier way to access the agent if you just want it quickly. Or like I mentioned before, you can go to that agents tab and then access it from there. As you can see, there were 4 agents before. Now there's a 5th one. That's the one we just created. And so there's 4 recurring, and 4 non-recurring, and 1 recurring. And so to now, quote unquote, launch the agent. So this is a non-recurring on-call agent, right? So this is an agent that's kind of there for ad hoc questions, like I mentioned in the beginning. And so it's an agent that you're just going to ask questions to, give answers. It can run deep analysis, has the same skill sets as your recurring agent. It's just that you have to kind of trigger based on exactly what you're looking for. And so with all the agents, I want to be specific is that the agents remember everything, right? So they remember everything from the time of inception. So any question that comes to this specific agent, it'll always remember that. And the great thing about it is, I think we talked about it earlier, was it has the ability to kind of know how your data has changed over time. So all its decision making, answers, and everything is always going to be in the tune of how your data has changed over that specific domain. That's the great thing about having a specialist as opposed to having a generalist system where you have to kind of start from scratch each time. And so you can ask it kind of basic question. This is just to kind of verify that the agent and what it's capable of. And so in my situation, let's say I'm asking for a very specific metric, like what is my churn and is there a consistent pattern? What it's able to do is able to, one, find the churn. It's a very basic value that it's able to understand, and it's able to also understand like what does churn mean in my situation? Because for some databases, churn means like you can see a customer uh up until a certain date, and then that customer no longer exists. Or in my situation, you can see that certain customers are active up until a certain point, and then they're marked inactive after another point. And so it's able to understand that entire relationship. Okay, what does churn mean? So it's kind of processes understanding what does churn mean in the context of your data. And then how do I calculate that churn? What are my indicators of churn? And on top of that, I'm asking it about the consistency at which I'm losing customers. And it kind of gives me the specific date, and it's telling me within this time span is where a majority of your churn has happened. So yeah, so here in my situation with the non-recurring agent, I'm kind of asking it a question about the churn. And the great thing about it is that's all I'm asking. I'm not telling it where to look for churn. I'm not telling it this is how you find churn, or I'm not telling it this is the indicator of churn. It is able to understand, because it has the understanding of your data. It knows exactly where to look for, which columns, which tables, which specific type of customers to look for. And it also knows that all its decision making is based around the fact that it needs to make this decision based on consumer behavior. And so it's able to kind of, one, window down where that specific churn is happening. If you can see like this, there's like a tight window between September to December where majority of those customers that you've churned are. And on top of that, it's able to also understand like what does churn mean? Because different tables mean different things. And so in our table, it's able to understand, okay, churn means a customer is marked active up until a point and then inactive after another point. So it's kind of tracking those specific customers throughout. And so again, this is just a very high level of what you can ask. You can go into more detail. I didn't want to dive too much into the data, but it's capable of doing that as necessary. Now, an interesting one is the recurring agent. Recurring agent is the same thing. You can click it and then you can launch it, just like the non-recurring agent. So here I'm launching my only recurring agent that I have, which is a monthly customer churn monitor. This is again in the very similar domain. But the reason I bring this up is the recurring agent has been autonomously kind of looking at uh, what's going on in the back, right? So it's something that I set up to kind of look monthly and seeing if my annual churn rate is changing at all. We know that value is at 40% from my non-recurring agent that I just went through. But the great thing about the recurring agent is since it's always tuned into my database, like on a schedule, you don't even have to be super specific. So what that means is I can literally ask like, hey, has anything changed the last time we talked? Because it knows exactly its domain expertise, what metric it's looking at, what its focus is, and when was the last time it checked in on the database. There is literally, so since it knows like exactly what it's been looking at, there's no need for me to even include any form of specificity on, you know, what's happening. So So it's like you can ask these extremely open-ended questions on its analysis that it's done, and it knows exactly what I'm talking about because of its domain expertise. In
Mhm.
the situation you use like a generalist agent, you'd have to be very specific, like this is exactly what I'm talking about. These are the exact metrics I'm looking at because it starts off from a, clean slate. This one, since it has so much data piled up on its own in its memory from the previous times it's done the on schedule analysis, me just asking, has anything changed? It knows I'm talking about the churn, and it knows exactly the metric and the number I'm referring to, which in this case is the 40%, which, as you can see, I never specified anywhere. Um, and so that's a really cool thing about the recurring agent. Again, these are high level, simple examples just to kind of drive home the point. The
Yeah.
depth of the analysis can be super deep, like we talked about. Predictive. Again, that's something we're kind of piloting. It includes kind of giving certain decision making. So if you want an agent that gives you suggestions, you can kind of specialize that agent to do so. But the control you have over the agents that you build is a really unique aspect. Is if you don't want an agent to constantly give you suggestions, which if you look at a system like ChatGPT or something, sometimes you ask a question, it answers the question and then gives you an additional dump of data or suggestions that you're not even looking for.
Right.
Um, and so here, if you kind of build your agent to just be an analysis centric agent, all it'll do is be able to communicate the data, the insights, and some of the predictions. But if you want a very specific insights agent, you can just create that agent and it'll just be one that's focused on giving you recommendations based on the on schedule or on call or off schedule queries that you send it. So that specialization is basically an additional layer of control that we're giving teams and users.
So I can use natural language to create an agent, configure it, and also update it along the way, depending on
Yes.
what more I want it to do,
Yes.
based on my connected databases, right? And I can also scale the number of databases. I can also work with multiple databases in the same setup, right? In the same project.
In the
Or
same project, yeah, in the same
yeah,
project. And what we're adding is so we understand that data is kind of split across potentially multiple databases, CRM tools, etc. So what we're adding right
right.
now is for an agent to latch on to any subset of data sources that you have. So as long as you add all those data sources, when you're creating the agent, as opposed to just inherently selecting a single database or single CRM tool, if you have a database and a CRM tool that you want the agent to kind of plug into, we're
Mm.
adding that ability for the agents to be able to do so.
Yeah, because I may say, okay, here, this particular table has got all or this particular database has got all the customer information. And then we have another database on which you just have product and feature sets. And
Yeah.
then you kind of need to map the two along with, information about account type,
Yeah, and
things like that.
the thing is, that's actually a great example that you brought up. So it's not a situation where you even have to tell it to map. It, moment you attach two, it'll automatically try and find how they're related.
Okay.
It's kind of built to do that. So it'll pick up on, like if I say customer churn, it'll automatically find the relationships it needs uh, from those two data sources, and there may not be any. But in the situation there is, it'll try and find how they're related so that it can understand customer churn holistically. So it's not something you have to kind of tell it where, okay, this column in that database actually means that in that database. So kind of look at that. It knows what to do. And so it's kind of offloading as much as possible during the build process for the user when they're creating the agent.
Now, this is pretty interesting from a business use case perspective. I'm thinking I can just query the agent and say, hey, give me a list of all the customers that have churned out for product A the last quarter, right?
Yeah.
And it gives me the list, and then I can then run it onto maybe an email campaign, which is kind of trying to get them back on board, things like that.
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
and on that similar sense, like let's say it's not something you want to query and it's something you just want the agent to kind of handle monthly. Say, can you create an agent that kind of lets me and notifies me when I'm losing like
Yes.
high value customers or something like that. And you can give it a threshold for the value, or it can kind of infer what that high value indicates. And it'll kind of look at, okay, these are the customers you're considering high value and automatically notifies you through the logs. Hey, every week you're losing, these are the high value customers you've lost. And so there's very flexible in that sense, yes.
So this becomes a very interesting thing because you can just do a simple query or just kind of simply set a rule to tell the agent that whenever there are more than 10% customers who are buying this particular product or this particular category of product and they churn out more than this, then I need to know with a list.
Yeah.
And it just does that. It sends me an email or sends me a Slack message. That whole workflow is super interesting.
Yeah, and that's something we're working on. That's why I think um, we've also started integrating CRMs in, because CRMs hold a lot of that information more than potentially databases for a lot of startups and early stage companies, right? And so
Yeah.
one big reason we're going into that CRM space and bringing CRMs in is for that very specific reason. The one thing that we're kind of looking at is how to kind of set these conditional triggers more than schedule triggers. So instead of having the agent only be able to run on a time basis, be able to also run on these conditional bases. But that again, it just involves the agent kind of checking in every once in a while, right, into your data source.
Right.
But it's definitely something that is very capable of, and that's what we're going to kind of add in with the CRM integration that we're working on.
Oh, that'll be super intelligent. It's like you have a database that is intelligent, right?
Yeah, basically, yes.
Essentially. Yeah. Pretty cool. Right. So let's take a step back and look at if you're pitching to a founder today, what is
Yes.
the value prop that you have for a founder without getting technical with it, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the basic pitch would be, look, I'm a founder, you're a founder. We know how hard it is to kind of get everything started. And it doesn't make sense to necessarily waste a bunch of money on insights by having to deal with the data yourself because you already have 100 other things to do on your plate, or going out and getting an analyst or hiring an analyst and wasting a bunch of money on that. So instead, just why don't you build your own? You probably have 100 different needs that you need from your data. You can build 100 different analysts if you want to, or any subset of that. You can save money, save time, and have everything running on its own. So, which means you get a bunch of time back on your hands, but you also get all the insights you need. So I'd say that would be my very quick pitch to a founder for Nexus. Save money and save time.
Okay. And can one also configure these agents to look at the data, look at the changing patterns, and then send you a notification saying, "Hey, you need to look at this"?
So that's something that we're working on. That specific vertical is beyond just right now. What we're integrating is the Nexus agents to be able to post logs onto the platform itself, especially if it's recurring, where it's running on its own. Then it can post anything it sees to logs. Next, what we're going to add is the capability for it to potentially send it directly to your Slack channel, if there's a specific Slack channel, or email if someone's a manager of that email that's looking at those insights. That's something that we're going to integrate, but that again will happen kind of business to business first as we're talking to the early customers and integrating with the specific systems they have in place right now, and then kind of expanding to more generalist methods of communication like Slack or email, which probably most businesses that we're going to talk to already have.
So, having spoken to so many users before you kind of dove into this side, this product, um, what do you see as a really burning need today for people who are building product
In general, or kind of to use
in
Nexus?
general and kind of leading to you?
Yeah, I think I'll keep it within the data space itself. There's a lot of data that comes in, and there's a lot of metrics now. Because back in the day, it wasn't. Like, I'll just stay true to now. Prior to 2023 itself, you didn't have to worry too much about social media metrics that come in. Now you have to worry a lot about social media metrics that come in. You have to worry a lot about 100 different channels. Now it's TikTok, Reels, Reddit, Twitter. You have so many channels that come in for social media. On top of that, you also have a wider reach of an audience for your products itself. It's not just in your local country or anything like that, or in your locale or in your country. You have international customers now due to the kind of pervasiveness of software. So kind of dealing with how we make decisions off of our data without wasting all our time just looking at the data, because you have to improve based on what your customers are providing for you. And I think that's a need that I've had and a need that a lot of people have, is how can we make those decisions off of that data quickly and fast? Because everything is now, there's 100 different products coming up. There's 100 different competitors coming up every second, every day now. And so it's all about moving fast, right? and what allows us to move fast. AI helps a lot in that situation for personal tasks, but now AI can also help in the data task. And that's what we're building with Nexus. Let Nexus handle that back grunt work for you so you can move fast. Because data takes time, data analysis and data insights takes time. So don't waste your time on that. We'll get back to you when it's ready and when the insights are ready. You go and make the decisions that you need to. And so I think that concept of moving fast with so much feedback coming in is a lot of pressure that a lot of founders, a lot of businesses face. But or at least my goal is how can I alleviate that pressure, at least in the data sector or in the data space.
Okay. And what's your core vision with the product and the company?
Yeah. So I think doing it in terms of roadmaps, or my at least 6 month roadmap is to see how many to get as many early stage companies and early stage startups and small businesses onto Nexus at some form of capacity. It doesn't have to be their entire data, but at least a good threshold of their data on Nexus and see how Nexus is directly impacting their business and their insights and their decision making. And so my goal is to at least pervase through a good category of tech startups and businesses and small businesses in the next 6 months. The goal is by the end of the year to potentially at least break into 2 to 3 enterprises, mid to small to mid-sized enterprises, and see how it integrates with more kind of very structured systems because early stage teams don't have superstructure systems. So how Nexus can impact and integrate with them superstructure system so that when these enterprises run, you no longer need to have an analytics department. It's just a Nexus department in a lot of these enterprises and mid to small to mid-sized enterprises in at least the next year. And so that's my whole vision is where I walk into a company and they're potentially using Nexus. I just want to see like one entire department just called the Nexus department and just a bunch of Nexus analyst agents working for the analytics. And there's not a need for a separate room or separate whole building just dedicated to analysts or an analytics team. It's just a Nexus team.
What kind of infrastructure would you need to scale this?
Yeah, I think infrastructure is the nightmare of every early stage founder because you don't know how much you need to spend. I think the cool thing about this is since we're such an AI company, an AI dependent company, the cost of actually scaling this are low because AI costs are getting so low. And as models improve, the kind of uh, additional infrastructure to make sure the model performed well also starts to get lower. And so predominantly our only infrastructure is probably at some point manpower to build this out, and also backend costs, backend infrastructure costs to essentially manage the servers and databases, do the analysis. But the cool thing is, like I mentioned, like the AI costs are getting so low over time. It's cents right now to run like 100 queries. Uh, it's just going to become lower and lower over time. So at a point where a predominant amount of infrastructure costs is just literally running some of the algorithms in space. So it's just going to be kind of server infrastructure beyond anything else. And man,
So when you talk about the models are you using public models that are available today, or have you built your own custom stuff on top of it?
no, these are all public LLM models that we're using.
Okay. So then what's the real, isn't that a risk in terms of someone else can pick up on the models and build what you're building very easily?
I think that's a risk with any AI company today, as most AI companies are dependent on large language models. And I think what lesson I've learned is there's going to be competitors. There always will be. I'm a competitor to someone else, and I'm using very similar models as someone else. But I think as long as I'm able to deliver value to my customers and my shareholders, uh, let the competitors come. We'll just continue to improve our product. What I think makes us different is I think we've latched onto a vertical that is being overlooked by a lot of existing competitors, which is the automation of the data analysis as opposed to having the user have to query every single time for data analysis and creating these specialists as opposed to these generalists. And I think as long as we have that advantage and we move fast, which we're trying to do right now, I think we'll be okay and we'll be able to provide to our customers because that's all that matters at the end of the day.
Awesome. So what are your current that you want to talk about?
I think our primary focus right now is customer. So any early stage startups, which I'm sure there's a lot of who listen to the podcast, any tech startups, early stage startups, small teams, and even potentially small businesses that have a lot of their data either existing inside databases and have to deal or waste a ton of time and money trying to get insights from that, or are planning to eventually move into databases. We can help you out with that. We can help out with that as well. But anybody who wants to offload that analysis to their own custom built agent specialists, please reach out to me. That's definitely the kind of people that we're looking for. We want to help you grow. We want to help you support and make the best business decisions. And that's from a customer perspective. From a talent perspective, I'm trying to grow the best team possible to build this. And so anybody who is super passionate about helping companies, dealing with data, super passionate about data and specifically AI, obviously, and AI agents, feel free to reach out as well. We'd love to talk to you, add you to the team potentially and see how we can collaborate.
Any specific skill sets you're looking for in the team?
I think as long as with vibe coding and a lot of coding tools these days, I think anything is possible. So as long as you're super, detail oriented and at least have a high level knowledge of building agentic systems and have experience having built at least a few agentic systems or how they work, I think we can make it go.
Nice. And where can people reach out to you on social?
Yes. So I'd say primary social is probably Twitter. It's NickPill06, NIKPIL06 on Twitter. Feel free to reach out to me there. I'm going to launch the demo video on there as well. And so anybody who wants to check it out can check it out there. Or you can also just reach out directly to me through email at nikilpillai2002@gmail.com. Site trynexus.io.
It was super awesome to talk to you and learn about what you're building with Nexus. Really happy to have the conversation today and wishing you all the best. Folks who are listening in, reach out to Nikhil at his Twitter handle. I'm also adding it to the description on YouTube as well as on Spotify, and then you can directly connect. Let's try and make some serendipity happen for Nexus and Nikhil. Yeah, onward and upward.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.